everybody. Today, I want to talk a little bit about queer history and how it affects our present, not just for LGBTQ people, but for all of us. First, I'd like to start in the year 1990. 5 years before I was born, an organization was founded in New York called Queer Nation. It was made as a response to escalating violence against LGBTQ people from criminals and police alike. At protests, they would carry signs that had a number of slogans, among them, "We're here, we're queer, get used to it." It remains a mystery who came up with that slogan, which has been passed down and innovated on over decades of pride marches and protests, but Queer Nation helped popularize it beyond queer spaces to push it into the mainstream of social consciousness. Indeed, in 1998, just 8 years after the organization was founded, a character in the groundbreaking sitcom Will and Grace would say the words, "I'm here, I'm queer, get used to it." Acceptance isn't something that happens overnight, and it isn't something that is won through being passive. The reason people can come to accept that gay people are here, that queer people are here, is through understanding, through showing them that we are equal. Sometimes that process is loud, sometimes it's a protest or a parade. But always with the goal of equality in mind, the fight for acceptance is one that helps us all. History has shown time and again that new ideas and different kinds of people are often met with pushback. People will spread lies and fear about people they don't understand. This happened with the gay community just as it continues to happen with the trans community. Such is the way of ignorance. But to fight back against ignorance and intolerance, we should enlighten, educate, and most importantly, understand that it's a gradual process. For if refusing to learn and refusing to understand is the weapon used against us, there's no better counter than spreading understanding and tolerance. All of this is to say, today I'm talking about the importance of simply being here. Not carrying signs, not wearing all rainbows or marching in the parade. While those are certainly wonderful things, I want to say it is far more important to be here. As a brief introduction, I am Jordan Black, though some of you may be more familiar with the work I've done under the name of my YouTube channel, Dead Domain. For the last year, I've worked full-time as a YouTube content creator. I've created in-depth video essays and streams and discussed many things that affect our lives here today. As a non-binary queer person, I have given my opinions on the anti-LGBTQ and specifically anti-transgender measures that have developed across the country in the last few years. And I've spent countless hours in research to disprove the lies and narratives being perpetuated about LGBTQ people. And almost 1 year ago to this day, I started the investigative project that put my channel on the map and allowed me to make videos full time. Some of you may already know this story. Last year, I heard about a hate church here in Spokane. A preacher there had a sermon where he said queer people and the people who support them, allies, parents, family, should be killed by the government. After hearing about this on the local news, I decided to go undercover and attended the church for all of last June. I presented as a cis straight man and attended that church to find out where they were getting their rhetoric. I found the intolerance and hate they spewed, especially for queer people, wasn't based in any theology or Bible verse, but in the same debunked talking points used against trans and queer people more and more today. This should be no surprise that their rhetoric wasn't based in scripture. I'm sure many people here go to church or know someone who does who remains supportive and loving of LGBTQ people. As someone who grew up to church, I was lucky to have been part of a wonderful congregation, and because of that, I've always understood that church can be a place to find community, common understanding, and even a new kind of family. So none of this is to say that I think churches or Christians are bad. Yet this hate church wasn't one based in love, community, or caring for one another. Instead, I found that their ideology had been cobbled together from false narratives many of us have become accustomed to hearing. Narratives that, despite being proven false, still continue to surface. I'm sure you've heard stories about cat litter and litter boxes in schools. These were long proven to be a complete fabrication, but still spread out of willful ignorance, and the temptation to use stories like it to invalidate non-binary and gender non-conforming identities. Of course, there are the stories of the dangers of drag queen story hour, of the dangers of child-friendly drag shows. People like Chaya Raichik, who runs the account Libs of TikTok, spread propaganda online that reaches millions, spreading fear about children being assaulted at these events under the guise of protecting kids. The facts are that the criminals who prey on children are statistically most likely to know them personally, that the monsters who parents should fear are more likely someone they already know or someone in an authority position over them. Family members are more responsible for these horrendous crimes than any drag queens. These are undeniable facts that have been proven through decades of criminal investigations, yet they're never mentioned in these conversations. Because the point of all these stories is not to get the facts correct. They're not really to spread awareness, but to spread an agenda and fear. And when people believe them, I want you to think about how few of the people spreading these lies have actually ever met a queer person. How many people who spread hatred about trans people invading women's spaces have known a trans woman or talked to her long enough to understand the problems she has in common with a cis woman? How many people who spread hatred and bigotry about gay people have known or talked to one long enough to understand that they really aren't that different? And that's why I say it's important for you to be here. These lies, spread with impunity, with no oversight, and often no retractions when proven wrong, come from social media accounts like Chaya Raichik and Libs of TikTok, and media commentators like Matt Walsh. And while they see no consequences for their lies, their words do tangible harm. Libs of TikTok has been directly linked to multiple bomb threats, and the lies that people like Chaya Raichik spread lead to real violence. Earlier this year, we saw the death of Next Benedict, a high schooler who had barely begun to live. Just a few days ago, another high schooler, Cobalt Sovereign, had her jaw broken after being called slurs and trying to stand up for herself. It should be no surprise that the same narrative spearheaded by online bigots who make their money by stirring up hatred about things they know nothing about also made up the rhetoric I found in that church. Rhetoric that advocated open violence, not just force, but justifications for killing queer people and their loved ones. When I put the video about the hate church out, people were surprised to find out that something so hateful was in our backyard here in Spokane. Just up on Francis, across the street from Dairy Queen, is a church that preaches openly hateful, provably false rhetoric each and every Sunday. They encourage families to come so they can expose children to this very same, often violent ideology. People are surprised to find out that people like that could be our neighbors or our coworkers. But I wasn't. In the last few years, we've seen an explosion in anti-LGBTQ sentiment, particularly as it applies to transgender people. Our existence is not up for debate, yet the equality we should be afforded has become a topic of debate across political party lines. In 2022, 31 white nationalists were arrested at a Coeur d'Alene Pride event. They had brought weapons and riot gear, intending to start a conflict. This year, Idaho Governor Brad Little banned the use of proper pronouns to refer to trans and non-binary students in Idaho schools, stripping LGBTQ youth of their self-governance. And of course, throughout the year, the Pride mural, which sits at the front of this park, has been repeatedly defaced. One time, the people who defaced it even went so far as to try and burn it away. Make no mistake, while some of these events are openly violent and some wear the guise of civility, there is a link in the ideology that drives them all. They have the same goal: to make sure queer people are not seen or heard, to intimidate and spread fear, to make sure that if you are queer, you are not here. Which is why I want to thank you all for simply being here. To celebrate Pride isn't just to say you are happy with who you are or who you love, it's to yell for the world to hear, I am here. To celebrate with each other, with friends and family, is to show everyone who hates us that there is another way. It's to disprove the lies that are said about us, and in doing so, to show everyone that we too are worthy of love, respect, and dignity, just like them. We're here, we're queer. And as it seems like more companies are joining in on Pride and supporting their queer employees, don't forget that they don't make up Pride. I want everyone to ask themselves, if the sponsors with tents weren't here, would you be? If there were no vendors, nothing to buy, would you still be here? Pride is more than what corporations will put their logo on a t-shirt or put a rainbow on social media for a couple weeks. As we've seen with Target cowering to bigotry and rolling back their Pride selection at stores all over the country, at the end of the day, a company does not have values. Their employees may, but at the end of the day, shareholders are the ones deciding if Pride gets celebrated. Companies don't have struggles, they don't have fears. They don't worry about being thrown out in the street if they come out to their parents. They don't worry about being attacked if they wear makeup in public. Companies don't have to worry about being harassed for using a restroom and minding your business, and they don't have to worry about losing friends or family for simply wanting to live the happiest life they can. But LGBTQ people do. Many of you have probably faced similar problems. You may have had to rely on a found family or cut off communication with someone from your old life. Whatever the case, you are here and you are loved for who you are. And that is what Pride is about. You've probably heard somebody ask, well, where's Straight Pride Month? The same kind of people who will deface the Pride mural will often ask, why do we need a whole month for Pride? Why don't we have a Straight Pride Month? So to address why we still need Pride, I want to talk about a bit of history. Because I believe we can't move forward without knowing the past, without knowing and acknowledging the mistakes society has made before. We're simply refusing to learn from them. We can see this before our eyes today, as many of the same homophobic tropes are being reused for anti-trans propaganda. The old lies that have been proven false time and again, that trans people are dangerous, that they endanger children simply by existing. These were the same fears spread about gays and lesbians through the 80s and 90s, fear that time has proven false. As a child, I heard them. This history is still that recent, though it seems many have forgotten. I was 8 years old when Texas finally overturned sodomy laws intended to make being gay a criminal offense. I was 17 when gay marriage was legalized in Washington state in 2012. History isn't just to remember the mistakes of the past, but to uncover and illuminate. So back to the question, why do we need Pride? The answer is the same reason why most people know names like Neil Armstrong, Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates. It's easy to hear these names and associate them with power and success. Straight white men are what people expect inventors, innovators, and brilliant minds to look like. Now, is that because it's realistic, or because billionaires and the powerful like to market themselves that way? I'll let you be the judge. Regardless, the reason we need Pride Month is because we know those names. But how many of you know Lynn Conway? Many of you have phones with you. Inside that phone is a microchip. More than 50 years ago, Lynn Conway revolutionized the process of designing and fabricating microchips like the ones we use today. Without her, the history of technology would be very different. You wouldn't have those phones that you use to listen to music every day, or that you use for directions to find your way here. You don't know Lynn's name like you do Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, likely because when she came out as transgender in 1962, she was almost immediately fired by IBM. 50 years later, she was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Another name you may have heard is Alan Turing, whose name is the basis for the Turing test. His life was made into a film called The Imitation Game. His contributions to science and technology rival those of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, certainly, but for decades his name was scrubbed from history. For those who aren't familiar, Alan Turing was a British scientist in World War II. He was a mathematician, and his work cracking German codes was estimated to have shortened the war by 2 to 4 years. Afterward, he worked on a predecessor to what would become the computers that we all know and use today. As many who know their gay history will know, when it was found he was gay, which was a crime in Britain at the time, he was forcibly chemically castrated and ostracized. He died in 1954 of self-inflicted cyanide poisoning. It wasn't until 2013 that Britain posthumously pardoned the great mind who helped halt the Nazi war machine and laid the groundwork for the future of technology. These are just a few of the countless queer inventors and innovators who until recently were buried by history. People who did remarkable things and changed the world, and because of who they were and who they were loving, were ostracized. But what about those who weren't scientists? One thing we hear a lot today is that being trans is a fad, or that gender non-conforming people are just a recent trend. Like the arguments against gay and lesbian people in the 70s and 80s, these are just repackaged homophobia, meant to stoke and play on ignorant fears. The truth is that American history is built on people just like us. Being American, we know Western heroes like Wild Bill Hickok, Davy Crockett, and Jim Bowie. But who here knows Harry Allen? Harry Allen worked as a ranch hand, a cowboy, and sometimes an outlaw. He was a renowned drinker, bar fighter, and lover. On more than one occasion, a woman threatened to kill herself when he left town, such was his charm. Yet he had been assigned female at birth. When this was revealed to the papers, he was subjected to constant ridicule, dead naming, and disrespect. He died in 1922. And people might say, well, just because someone dresses a certain way, that doesn't make them transgender. And it's true that transgender is a modern word meant to capture a modern understanding of an issue. But I want to read you a quote from a 1908 interview, and I want you to ask yourself if this sounds like a trans person. In the Seattle Sunday Times in 1908, Allen articulated his discomfort with his assigned sex, saying, quote, "I did not like to be a girl, did not feel like a girl, and never did look like a girl," he said. "So it seemed impossible to make myself a girl, and sick at heart over the thought that I would be an outcast of the feminine gender, I conceived the idea of making myself a man." How about Sammy Williams, a well-known and beloved lumberjack? Known as a ladies' man, he worked through Dakota, Iowa, Montana, and other frontier territories until his death in 1908. It was discovered that he had also been assigned female at birth. Another personal favorite of mine is the story of Old Nash. A renowned seamstress who worked in the Army under General Custer, she was beloved by everyone in the company and even met her third husband there. She worked as a midwife and was known for her ability to help calm women during birth. When she passed, it was discovered that she had been assigned male at birth. When told about her passing, General Armstrong's wife, Libby Custer, simply said, "Poor dear, I hope she's finally comfortable." There are so many stories like this, and they all have a few things in common. Most importantly, that these people were loved and accepted for who they were because people took the time to know them, accept them, and love them. While some judged and disrespected them, the ones who didn't found new friends, family, and loved ones. And of course, the country we now inhabit would be nothing without the people who cared for and tended the land for untold generations before white settlers colonized it. In these communities, too, are plentiful examples of queer roles and gender nonconformity. Across various tribes, two-spirit people, born both male and female, fulfilled roles as tribal healers, visionaries, and medicine people. The Lakota Winkte were born males who adopted feminine roles in the tribe. Some tribes recognized 4 or more distinct genders, recognizing that who someone was meant more than how they had been born. Much of tribal understanding of gender is beyond our modern conceptions and has likewise been buried until fairly recently by settler colonialism. These stories are far from the only ones out there, and the most important aspect of this queer history isn't the stories we know, but the ones that we don't. How many people would have called themselves transgender or non-binary if we had the words and conversations to allow it? How many people would have led happier, more fulfilling lives if they felt free to love the ones they wanted? How many people have we lost because they felt life wasn't worth living if they couldn't live as they truly were? The National Park Service has estimated that 400 women posed as men during the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. How many would be called transgender, lesbian, or some other identity today? How many people fought like this in the Revolutionary War? We will never know the myriad answers to these questions, because until recently, it has been one of the greatest social crimes to be who you really are. These people who have been all but forgotten by history, they are who I think of when people ask, why do we need pride? Because we have always been here, from fighting the most important battles in our history to aiding our most important innovations. Queer people of all stripes, transgender, gay, lesbian, gender nonconforming, have been an integral part of society's fabric. There is no social contagion that will convince somebody to be queer, just as there is no propaganda that will stop someone. That's why we have pride. Queer history is history. Yet many are just now hearing it. Through the hard work and advocacy of LGBTQ people and historians, these stories can finally be uncovered and told. These stories break the narratives we've been told that being trans or gay is a modern invention or fad, that society has always hated and disagreed with us. And none of these stories would be nearly as widely known. None of these people would have been awarded or uncovered if we didn't have pride, if we as queer people hadn't spent decades standing up and saying, we are here, we are queer. Because like Lynn Conway was fired for being trans, like Alan Turing was forced to be dehumanized by his own government, for far too long people have wanted to pretend we simply don't exist. And it's important to remember Indigenous people in this history, just as it's important to remember the contributions of Black people to LGBTQ history overall. Because while our struggles have been different, we are united in our fight for love and acceptance, and united against the goals that attempt to erase us. That's why pride is important. And still people will say, well, why do we need rainbows everywhere? Why do we need events for kids? When someone says, I don't hate gay people, but isn't it a bit much? I don't have anything against gay people, but do you need to be so loud about it? There's nothing wrong with being that way, but I think you should just keep it to yourself, they'll say. It's people like this that want others to wait for acceptance, to sit down quietly and idly and not yell, not parade, not ask for respect that is due them. And it reminds me of when Martin Luther King wrote about the white moderate, someone who doesn't disagree that you deserve equality, but doesn't agree with protesting to get it. Someone who claims to support you but is wary of advocating too much for fear of upsetting the status quo. Martin Luther King said, quote, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Black man's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action. These words from Reverend King still ring true, but it is the capstone of this paragraph that resonates through history, and I hope you all carry with you when you leave. When Dr. King says, quote, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. End quote. He wrote these words in his letter from Birmingham jail. While he was talking about the equality of Black people in America, go and read these letters and you will find the words ring true today, not just for Black Americans, but for any minority that experiences oppression the world over. Which is not to say that simply being queer entitles an understanding of the struggle of people of color, because it doesn't. We have all faced different trials from different perspectives. Oppression is not a matter of competition, but of cooperation. It's why intersectionality is so important. In that same letter written in Birmingham jail, Dr. King laid out succinctly why it's not enough to simply care for yourself or your friends or the things that affect your personal group, because we are all more than that personal group. King writes, quote, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned with what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. End quote. I bring up the words of Dr. King in the civil rights movement for two reasons. The first is intersectionality. By understanding the struggles of others, we can learn to move forward together. The second reason is that Black American history and queer American history are inextricably linked. We cannot talk about queer history without talking about Black history. We can't talk about queer history without acknowledging the contributions of women like Marsha P. Johnson during the Stonewall riot that is known to many as the First Pride, or the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s and 30s that created a haven for gay Black writers and thinkers. We can't acknowledge the ground we've gained in pop culture with LGBTQ shows like Drag Race without acknowledging that drag culture was built from the ground up by poor Black communities in metropolitan areas. It's important to remember the things we take for granted were once taboo. And now that those things are accepted, we cannot forget where they came from. To simply take the contributions of a group like Black and people of color and queer people, yet not acknowledge their unique struggles and how those struggles continue today, we risk becoming no different than the people who took the innovations of people like Alan Turing and Lynn Conway without respecting who they were and what they had been through. And even now, as we collectively fight for our rights, we cannot ignore Black LGBTQ people because they continue to suffer. In 2024 alone, 80% of victims of anti-LGBTQ violence were people of color, and 40% of all of those victims were Black trans women. When we fail each other, we fail ourselves. This is why education is so important. It is not enough to advocate for yourself. It is not enough to look ahead to your own bright future. You must look behind you and see who is being left behind and know that it is your duty to help them. It's another reason why it's so important that you be here. It is not enough to be here for yourself. You must be here for the person next to you and understand whatever their struggles, whatever their pains, you can share love and understanding. That is how we move forward together and how nobody is left behind. Last, I want to talk about why we need Pride. For those who may not be out yet, who may be questioning, who may be afraid it's too late or nobody will love them if they live as themselves. Every day, there are going to be people who don't know you, who don't understand you, and who hate you. Pride has become almost as stressful as it is joyous. The lingering fear that hangs over every event I've been to. Who will show up to protest? How will we be protected if something goes wrong? And yet, here you are. For many, this will be their first Pride or their first Pride out. The first time they will be gathered with so many other people who have shared the same struggles, heartaches, loneliness, and hurdles, and who now share the same pride. A pride in understanding who you are and who you want to be. Confronting both of these things, the unknown in the world and the unknown within ourselves, takes bravery. For many, this self-discovery isn't a simple or an easy journey. I know too many people, whether they are gay, lesbian, trans, or non-binary, who live in fear of being themselves. Every day they are at war with themselves, fearing what people will think of them, what people will say. Even their closest friends and loved ones. They fear what their fathers or mothers will think of them if they knew. They fear losing their partners or loved ones if they told them. And I want to tell you, if you struggle, that's okay. That is the goal of educating kids on the existence of trans or gender nonconforming people, of teaching kids there are other ways to be. It's not to indoctrinate or spread propaganda, but to let them know it's okay. If they are different, if someone they know or someone they love is different, they still deserve love, compassion, and respect. Because for far too long, people have kept themselves hidden from the world, squandering our short time on earth in the shadows of others' expectations for them, instead of living the happiest lives they can. It's another reason why Pride is so important, why it's not just enough to be queer, but to be here, to show someone else that it's okay to step out into the light. But if you're not ready yet, that is okay too. It's easy to say, don't be afraid. They're three simple words. They're easy to apply to almost any worry. Don't be afraid what others will think of you. Don't be afraid what they will say about you. It's easy to say, it's another almost impossible feat to have no fear in the face of the things that affect us. Of all the reasons I've said for Pride and for being here, this is the most important. To be here for one another. To be here for community. So whether you are queer or not, whether you are here or not, whether you are out or not, I want you all to know something. If you think nobody cares about you, I want you to know I care about you. If nobody else calls you family, I will call you family. If nobody else is proud of you, I want you to know I am proud of you. And I'm not the only one. It's natural to be afraid of change, but if history teaches us one thing again and again, it's that together we can overcome fear. Think back to everyone who's come before us, the people who suffered and died, who lived as outcasts, the people who protested at Compton's Cafe in Stonewall. Fear is nothing new for the LGBTQ community, but neither is bravery. So for Pride, I challenge you to be brave, to help others, to educate them and yourself. Whether you are an ally or queer, I want you to stand strong in the face of ignorance and hate. And I want you to spread understanding, love, and compassion. Because the best way to celebrate Pride is to show the world why we are proud. I am proud to know people like me have always existed. I am proud to finally be living the life I've always wanted, but was too afraid for so long. I am proud to be loved and accepted and understood, and I am proud that I am not alone. So however you identify, whatever your journey looks like, I want to thank you for being you, and I want to thank you for being here. Thank you.